want to just make a quick announcement?
Yes, so Leah just reminded me that tomorrow is photo day. So please remember to uh, wear your best shirt and tie or whatever you like to wear for photos because we're doing updated board photos and staff photos. So the staff will be pulling people out for a quick headshot as we go through, and then we'll do a board photo at lunchtime. So just giving everyone advance warning and a reminder too about the OCC meeting tonight at 5:30. Hope everybody joins us to go and say thanks for the hosting the last couple of days and for everything they've done to support us. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks for that, Ross. So with that, formally open the board meeting. Feels slightly odd saying welcome when we've already been at the forum over the last day and a half, but nevertheless, welcome everybody. It's good to see you here, and I think obviously we will draw heavily on the very good discussions in the forum when we get into item 3 on the agenda. In terms of the item 1, I will probably just sort of add some commentary and explanation because obviously we've got a slightly larger public gallery than before. So then if we move first into item 1, I think we do have one apology in that unfortunately, we don't have Angela with us this meeting. We have had comments on her behalf from the members of staff at the XRB, so staff will play those in as we go through. And then I think we also have Abdullah joining us virtually this week. Other than that, we have all members present. In terms of then moving through the agenda, the next item that we pause on is the minutes from the June 2025 meeting. And of course, those have already been circulated for member comment. So I'd like to just pause and check whether there are any final comments before we approve. So not seeing any flags raised, so I think we take the June 2025 draft minutes as approved. Then we move on to the minutes from the July virtual check-in, similarly circulated for comments. Opportunity for any final comments on those. So again, not seeing any flags raised, we take those as approved. Then we move into the two dashboards. So the IPSAS IFRS alignment dashboard, and just for the benefit of those in the public gallery, this is a project management tool that we keep up to date, but it's very important from an accountability point of view that we are applying our rules of the road process. And so if you look into that, there's a summary of the situation in terms of degree of public sector specificity of the standards, but also importantly, degree of alignment with the relevant IFRS standards. So that's kept up to date literally quarterly, and it shows where we are in terms of those projects in progress and that's yet to start. I think interesting if you look at the discussions that we've been having over the last day or so, if you look down the list at the moment, IPSAS 18, we are on an old version of the standard, so that shows up as a red. And similarly, IPSAS 20, there are outstanding changes to the underlying standard that we have not yet picked up on. Other standards, actually, we're in a better shape. But then if you look at IPSAS 1, for example, then obviously IFRS 18 has come in and that's an active project. So it's a useful project management tool, and essentially the board has used that then when we think about the list of potential projects. If I go then to the other dashboard, this is one that João has put considerable effort into between the last time you saw it and this time, and it very much reflects the input from the task force that met in Bern in July. Like I say, thank you very much to Florian and to Mark from the statistics office there, who hosted a very good meeting for us over 2 days, and we made a lot of progress. Of course, what goes with a lot of progress is a lot of comments, which João has had the first round of, and is now happily about to work his way through second round of comments. So we will come back and we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to the project paper on that on Friday. But it has changed quite significantly as that group has really put a lot of intensive work into that. So that's an important piece of work. And then finally, in terms of the final part of item 1 is the report on activities and the outreach that has been done collectively. And I think this is an important part of our activities as a board. And when you look at the nature and range of the output that we collectively have done between us, I think it's a fantastic job in that, it's literally all around the world, and it is a lot of extra work from our volunteer board. So thank you very much, everyone, for the collective work on that. And that is something that we do also report on to IFAC board each quarter. So thank you very much for that. And I think with that, unless there are questions, that takes us through item 1. Any points anybody wants to make before we move on to Ross's report? Okay, so with that, Ross, over to you for the Programme and Technical Director's report.
Thanks, Ian. So no major updates on the work program at the moment that I wanted to discuss on day 1. Do fully expect we'll revisit the work program on day 4 and go through any major changes or impacts based on progress we have during the meeting. I did want to kind of link back to representation activities item 1.7 as well, and just again to highlight how important that is from a staff perspective, that we members and TAs report their outreach and engagement. It helps us understand who the board's been engaging with and the topics of discussion with the board. And I did want to highlight a recent outreach activity that I participated in just a week and a half ago, where I had the opportunity at the invitation of SIPFA and the Chartered Institute of Pakistan to go to Pakistan and observe a number of public sector auditors get a SIPFA qualification that they'd earned through the SIPFA process, but then go to the Auditor General's office and go to the Accountant Auditor General office and kind of see what they're dealing with in reality day to day in terms of their systems, processes, and procedures, and what they're dealing with from the standards. And I could say it was a very eye-opening and interesting experience that I'm happy I got to participate in, but it made me think we need to make sure at the board level that when those types of opportunities are happening as well, that you want to recording those if you are having those discussions and share with staff, because it does help us in our work to really know the reality of the transition from the standards themselves to the systems on the ground and the capacity issues being dealt with by jurisdictions. Thanks.
So any points anyone wants to raise on Ross's report? Okay, that's good. Thank you for that, Ross. So let us move on then to the work program consultation. And Dave, maybe I'll hand over to you just to introduce the item.
Thanks, Ian. So I think we'll so what we'll do is we will have some discussions on what we heard from the Public Sector Standard Setters Forum, but I think I'll catch us up and give a reminder of how we got here. So this project hasn't actually been ongoing that long. The board decided to add it to the work program last December and decided it was the right time to go out and consult as resources open up in 2026. In March, you had your first discussion where you started to point staff in the direction on how you wanted this consultation to look. And the advice and instruction was to keep it more open than we've seen in the past. And then in June, you saw the first iteration of the work program consultation. We took your decisions and instructions away and brought those back to you in July so that you could see those. We also shared it with the CAG in June, and the CAG was able to provide advice, and we took that advice and incorporated that into the July version as well. What's happened since July are two items. One just happened and we're in the middle of was the Public Sector Standard Setters Forum, where we're able to hear feedback and I don't know, take that into account in what we're going to include in the list of projects that the IPSASB has previously heard about. The other item that happened and it's been incorporated into the papers is it was circulated to the PIC, and that's done as part of due process to ensure that the public interest is taken into account and that it fits into the broader strategy and work program that the IPSASB has developed in consultation with the PIC. The PIC had two comments, and we'll go through those as we go through the second agenda item later. Ian, I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks, Dave. I mean, I think it shows there's quite a lot gone into this already in terms of the various different discussions and so on. So what we want to do today is we will circle back to the formal work plan consultation document that the board needs to approve. But before we get there, what we need to do is actually have a discussion about the list of previously, as we called it, previously suggested projects, and what the board feels about that list, bearing in mind the various different pieces of input that we've had during the forum. And I think, there's been a lot of the feedback session we had this morning has showed a lot of interesting comments. And perhaps before we start to move into the various different aspects of what that means in detail, I might just pause for any general comments that board members have before we start to talk about how we factor in, do we factor in, the suggestions that we've had to date. So open for any high-level comments at this stage. It's the first session after lunch. Karen, start us off.
I'm not going to say anything very profound, I don't think, but just to get the ball rolling. I mean, I've found the Standard Setters Forum really useful. Am I not close enough?
I think as a general comment, actually, the acoustics are quite muffled. They muffle sound. So if you can make sure you speak very closely into the microphone, that will help.
I will do my best. Is that better? Yeah, excellent. Right. I found the Standard Setters Forum really useful. I had some ideas in my head, and being able to listen to the discussions over the last day and a half have reinforced some of those thoughts or changed some of them based on what I've heard, and what people are giving priority to. Some really interesting messages around. There's a lot out there, and maybe we need to pause and allow a bit of digestion in the process, as well as what needs to come next over the horizon, and particularly support for implementation. That's not something that we talk about an awful lot, but obviously requires staff time, and so I think it's really important that we think about that as part of the forward agenda. But having the forum before the board meeting, I think, is incredibly helpful, very useful, and a good development to help inform our thinking. So hopefully that's high level enough to keep things going.
That's good. I was really just pausing before we start to move into a more detailed discussion, just really getting that kind of top level What are my thoughts at this point in time? Okay, so not sensing anybody else has got anything burning that they want to sort of throw in at this point in time. In terms of sort of structuring our discussion, I think it might be helpful, perhaps if we just talked about it in four broad buckets. And one thing that has come through to me, which I think we probably need to talk about, is post-implementation reviews. I think when the board had discussed this before, we sort of said this is very early days. We don't want to put anything definite into this list, but I think we've certainly heard some feedback about there are some PIRs there that maybe, the constituents that we've been with, would prioritise, and therefore maybe we need to put something in. So if we can have a discussion around that area, I think obviously then let's just have a look at the financial reporting projects that we've got in there. Let's also have a look at the sustainability reporting projects, and then perhaps as well we have a few more general projects, and let's just talk about how we might approach that, and whether those are part of this consultation as projects, or whether there's some other things there that we need to take away and think about. So perhaps if I can open up then in terms of post-implementation reviews, if you look at what we have there, and just let's go to page 3 of the list of previously suggested projects. Obviously, we've got there the list of projects, which then there's some more detail on later in the document, but conspicuous by its absence is PIRs. And I'd just be interested, perhaps if we can start there and just get some reactions from board members in terms of what they've heard, and does that mean that we should actually be thinking about adding specifically to the list some PIRs or potential PIRs, because none of these are approving at this stage. Obviously, this is just actually putting ideas out there. Dave.
Ian, maybe while members think, I'll set a little more context, and you mentioned it right at the very end, but what this previously suggested projects document has morphed into a little is almost a running list of projects the board's heard about, and it'll be a staff document, so it's easy to add and subtract, but I think it is good to have a strong running list. So just wanted to put that into context, and maybe just to go back to when the decision to not include PIRs in the list was made. I think that might have been back in March, and we obviously didn't have all the information we heard from the Public Sector Standard Setters Forum, but there seemed to be a lot of discussion around that. So just wanted to put that all into context as you put your flags up.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Scott, I think you were first, and then to Karen.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I wandered by the table on 35. So consolidations, there seems to be a lot of effort on that one. So I think that would be worth something putting back on the table. And just to reflect a little bit, Ross, on the conversation we had in the regional breakout, I'm not sure we're still as clear as we should be of what's a PR and what's not. Okay, what does it take to actually be a review? Yeah, we got into conversations about, well, how much do you change the standard before it moves from a PR into a deliberation? So that may be something else we may want to think about deliberating a little bit on here to give our common thought on that. We talked about that in the regional breakout.
Thanks, Ross. Scott, Ross, before I go to Karen.
Yeah, I think Scott, that's a great point to pick up from the regional breakout. So one of the national standard setters in the room, gave us a comment on how their PIR processes work, and they're maybe a little more limited in nature than maybe how we were thinking about it, and that they've got some pretty strict rules around it. And, my response from a staff perspective is, because we've never done a formal PIR, it's still kind of theoretical. And we do have the kind of pilot project we're planning to do, but we haven't started. So I do think we need to be a little open and flexible, but to Scott's point, that's kind of part of going through it once, is to say, well, this is kind of how it's going to work. And putting the boundaries around it. So we could go narrow like, particular jurisdictions have, and we could go much broader. But I think the benefit of, putting the PIRs on the list that's been talked about is that we'd have a transparent open way to start a new project, to kind of go out and survey and find out what's there before deciding what to do in terms of standard setting. So I think that's the key element of PIRs that's different than what we would do today, where we might just say, determine what the project problem is and just start solving it, but we might not have the full information on what are the other issues are that we could also consider in that project. So I want to share that.
Thanks, Ross. So I think, again, it probably comes back to it. It does come back to the fact that we're just getting our feet wet, really, or not even that, on PIRs. And I think, probably, I think Andrew's reminded us on this, in that, there's a difference between a PIR and a standard setting project, that the PIR is the diagnosis phase, out of which may come nothing, some minor amendments, or a standard setting project. And I think we've got to kind of keep that in mind. So none of that says we're doing a PIR, therefore there will be a project, because actually we might say it's fine. Or whatever. So I think just to remind ourselves on that. But I think again that point about narrow scope, wider scope, all of that kind of thing comes into this, and maybe that's where the discussion that we had, that's been referenced in a couple of places in terms of the March meeting, where we sort of said, well, IPSAS 20 looks like a good place to start, because it's kind of something that we can get our arms around, whereas actually, has been said already earlier on today, IPSAS 18 is actually quite a there's a lot more in that one, and we'd need to think quite carefully about, is that a PIR, or do we do a PIR before we leap into a standard setting project or whatever? But so I've got Karen, then Claudia, then David.
Thank you, Chair. And you saw me nodding vigorously, so I completely agree with the approach to PIR. To your question, though, about what's in this annex document, I do think it is useful to reflect the discussions that have happened, and to put PIRs on the list. I do, however, think that we should differentiate between what we've got out of the Standard Setters Forum and what went before, because if you look at this list of items, there isn't a huge overlap between what, there is some overlap, but there are a number of things that are on this previously raised projects that we didn't hear about over the last day and a half. And I think we shouldn't suggest that those are the most pressing things that standard setters are telling us. So we ought to differentiate somehow between what we've heard from the Standard Setters Forum and what we've heard before, because some of this is much less current than actually what's on people's minds today. And I think we need to help those looking at it by making that differentiation.
Thanks, Karen. Ross, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think the board should take credit for the input we've got from the forum going into the consultation. So maybe one way to do it, as this will be an annex document, is maybe with a little bit of a introduction on what's in the document and why, and maybe you can highlight that we've just had these discussions, and I wouldn't call them projects yet, but we had discussions on a number of issues in different jurisdictions, and they're broad-based issues, and some of those relate to some specific projects on our list. Some relate to new things that we've added, and we could highlight that in that way, that have the context of that, because I wouldn't jump to a conclusion that because we didn't hear about them, that these other projects might not also be relevant either. Because we do have one group of stakeholders that's input here, and there's some broader group as well.
Thanks, Ross. Yeah, and I think, part of what we might want to do when we get into some of the financial reporting, for example, is actually make sure that the description that's in here actually reflects what we've heard, as well as actually maybe asterisking those projects that kind of specifically came up in discussion or something like that. So I think I think that probably actually is an instruction to staff, that they need to think about exactly how do we indicate that, and how do we also reflect points that have come up that should be reflected in relation to existing projects that are already on the list. So next I've got Claudia, then David, then Andrew.
Thank you. Just remind us that on page 7 from the IPSASB work program consultation, there's a description what PRI is. And it's exactly what you need to read before you go into the project. So it's the states that what could be the outcome of an PRI, and that it's explicitly clear. So for me, the add-on, I have a few suggestions. One general is just we make it more clear that it's a staff paper, maybe on the first page, something like that. And to the PRIs, I would have it the proposals we get from the forum here, but we need really to reframe the editorial or the instruction to this paper. And I'm wondering if we have time and we can really finalize the tables for these. I think it was finally 4 standards that was proposed in the broker groups. If you can really deliver this in this detail, that maybe we have to think about if it's the same presentation or do we have a different presentation for the peer projects?
So I think what we're going to need to do is I mean, I'm beginning to get a sort of sense that we should include the PIR or some of the PIR projects, and we can kind of pick up in a moment from the discussion, and it will need to reflect that. It does seem to me that what we're going to need to do is actually, because this isn't a formal board document that we're going to vote on, but I think we probably are going to need an editorial group just to work with staff to make sure that we've got the the points in if we go down this route, and there may be consequentials then in terms of just the description in the actual document. So I'll go to David next and then to Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I mean, without wanting to sort of labour the points that Karen and Claudia, you have made, I mean, I agree that the feedback that we had from PSSSF has been very useful. It needs to be reflected in a document, probably this one, to show that we've listened and that we're taking it seriously. But at the same time, we need to, picking up on Claudia's point, we've got to give the same level of information for each of the projects that's mentioned, I think. So if we can't develop, or staff can't develop enough to match the tables that are already in there, then the way to do it is to remove some of the information that's in the tables that are there, so that there's a level playing field for all of the projects, whether it be financial reporting, sustainability, or PIRs. And in that way, I think we could get some quite useful prioritization. I mean, I'm picking up on Karen's point. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I mean, the matters of the moment we've heard this week. These matters were matters of the moment 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I think we need to be seen to move with the times. So, thanks.
Thanks, David. Andrew, to you next.
Thanks. I agree that we should be including what we've heard from the forum into the table or the document. I do think it should be a separate section highlighting the difference of the various inputs that come through. I think that the challenge that we're going to have, just to highlight, is I think there's quite a lot of overlap between the previous list and what we've heard, and I don't know how we get that message out to individuals. Say, this is what we've previously heard, this was now on the standard setters forum. Perhaps don't share David's concern, because I see almost all of them overlapping. I think everything here, at least on a standard setting project, barring PIRs, I can accept, are there. The one thing I did just want to highlight is perhaps in that introduction, Ross, that you perhaps spoke about, just to make it clear to individuals, despite the fact that we've heard it at the standard setters forum, you still got to comment on this, right? Don't take this as now it's automatically on the work program.
Yeah, I think That's absolutely right. We need to get that communicated and out there. I mean, I think we can over-engineer this. To be honest, this is a list of projects that's come from various different sources. And I think if we're clear that we've updated it to take account of the feedback from the forum, quite frankly, we could just asterisk items to say this was something that was brought up at the recent Standard Setters Forum. Then as long as the rubric actually describes the various different sources, I don't think we need to be forensic in terms of this came up here, this came up here. I mean, the fact is there's a list that we've put together from various sources which people can select from, or they can actually suggest their own projects. So actually, but I do think we should acknowledge those that have been, that have been raised and debated here as priorities. But leave it to staff and the editorial group just to deal with that. But yeah, Abdullah, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. And it was really bad for me not being to be there. Congratulations on the successful forum. I've been hearing a lot about the successful discussions that you were having. I'm having only two comments. With including the outcome from the forum, it should be there. One of the thoughts that I was having is, or worries I was having, in how jurisdictions will go around the criteria that we were including. But since we are having everybody in the forum, there was a guidance, there was share of thoughts with them. My second point with the PIR, I'm with including the projects and at least to have reflections from jurisdictions and thoughts around it. So when we go through the PIR exercise, that we know the priorities from jurisdictions' point of view. So those are the thoughts that I'm having. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdullah. So I think we can agree that we are going to add PIRs, some example PIRs. I think we have to keep that. This is just ones that we've heard about in mind, and probably make that explicit for all the projects. In thinking about which, because we've heard about a number of PIRs, and I think there is this question about actually we also need to put some boundaries around what are some early stage challenges that our stakeholders are having in implementing the projects that we approved in 2023. And the fact that actually when we were setting up PIRs, we said that I think we said it was actually 5 years from the effective date. So I think that puts some boundaries around what could be added to the PIR list, if you like, in terms of the PIRs that perhaps I've heard that we might add to that list. Clearly, we've seen IPSAS 35 came well up the list of projects. Obviously, we also had IPSAS 41 there. Both of those would fall into that more than 5 years after the effective date. I think we need a discussion about what are we going to do about reflections on IPSAS 18. And perhaps might ask for some comments on that in a minute. I don't know whether there was anything else that came out. If we're saying that batch that we approved in March 23, which would include IPSAS 46, IPSAS 47, they are not candidates for PIR at the moment, but there may well be something else that we need to take away and think about. Are there some emerging issues which we need to do something about in the meantime? But that's so. Can I just have comments then on that proposal that we have basically IPSAS 35, IPSAS 41, and what do we do about IPSAS 18 in terms of, the comments that have been raised? Yeah, Claudia, lead us off.
Yeah, thank you. I really support to include IPSAS.
Do you mind bringing the mic right close?
Yeah,
sorry.
I'm sorry. I really support to include IPSAS 18 in the list of potential projects. Also, we heard for years that there might be an review of the standard is necessary. If it's a peer, it's a project, doesn't matter. But to ignore them seems a little bit weak. And I remember we have discussed them severally. Sometimes it was on the project list, and we said, no, it's more a peer project. So then we moved and from the document, because we in the first draft, we thought we don't want to mention peer. Now we mentioned them, so I think it have to be on the list. And then we hear what it's relevant or what it's the issue on this topic.
Okay, I think Karen, you're marginally ahead of Scott on that.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's a question for me about sort of what is our process here. So IPSAS 18 is based on an old IFRS, and there has been a new one. So is it our practice, if there is a new IFRS, to look at whether we should be aligning with that as a matter of course? And if that is our process, then it should be a potential project. If that isn't our process, then it's a PIR. But I think we should be consistent in the approach. Otherwise, we might flip-flop between, we just fancy doing a PIR on this one and an alignment on something else. And I don't think we should do that. I think we should take a consistent approach to whatever we're doing. So if it's a new IFRS and it's a potential alignment project, then maybe we should treat it as a project. I don't know if this has come up previously, but just a thought about the overall approach, because we should be consistent.
I don't think it has come up previously because we've tended to pick up. We've been in catch-up mode before, and so we're now moving into a new phase. Ross, I'll bring you in, and then I'll go to Scott, and then to Andrew.
I was just going to say what you said, Ian. I think because we haven't had PIRs before, we've never had two options. On 18, it is an older standard, and we haven't got a lot of push to go back and look at it, which is why I would say I would start with a PIR to see if there are issues before going in. And I think we haven't had this tool before, but I think it's a good tool to use with older standards before we start standard setting. And again, taking into account, we've heard people saying it's disruptive when things just start moving, that we actually survey and find out how the standard's being used, where the problems are, and then start standard setting. Because in some cases, we've kind of kickstarted a project where we think we're going to do a quick update to catch up with IFRS, and people have told us to put the brakes on pretty quick because it's kind of working as is in the public sector, and they're fine with us not being in line. But, better to get the information from those using the standards, use the PIRs.
Yeah. So Karen, back on that, and I would also just like to refer us then to agenda item 1.5, the dashboard, so if people can just open that up. So Karen, to you first.
I'm fine with that as long as it's consistent with our rules of the road. So does our rules of the road say that we should be aligned, and that's the approach that we take? I prefer a bit of diagnostic myself. So if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. So I'm definitely not looking to create work, but I do think that we need to have a consistent process that underpins that.
Thanks, Karen. Ross.
So the rules of road applies to when you've started a project, how you're going to manage it. If you've determined you're going to maintain alignment, it gives you the process to go through and consider when you want to depart from the principles and the underlying standard. It's not a project prioritization document that tells you when you start a project, you must go down this route or that route. That's board project prioritization and strategic. And our process for that is what we're going through now with talking to the CAG, talking to the PIC, talking to our stakeholders, and then looking at our resources available and deciding which projects we want to take forward. So, and at that point, again, if we use IPSAS 18 for an example, we could take that project on and completely agree not to go an IFRS road at all and say we need a completely public sector specific. I'm not advocating them, just saying the board has the ability to decide the nature of the project it undertakes.
So thanks both. I mean, I think that's why I raised it, because there was some. So if you go back to agenda item 1.5 and you look at the front sheet, you'll see the overview showing in the bottom half saying the degree significant IFRS changes addressed. And there is one standard which is showing up red, which means that we're on the old version of the standard and we haven't picked up any of the recent relevant IFRS amendments. And basically that is IFRS 18. If you go down the list, then you've got one which is red stroke green, which means we are on an old version of the standard as the basis for our standard, but we actually have an active alignment project, and that is presentation of financial statements there. And similarly then, when we get into IPSAS 20, it's actually the orange blob there. So there are amendments to the underlying IFRS that we haven't picked up yet, which are potentially relevant. So that's kind of the territory that we're in at the moment, and that's sort of the reason why we're having the discussion. Scott, you and then Andrew, you've been patient whilst we've had those.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment supporting the PIR for the 18, particularly since we heard an academic paper this morning that actually maybe give us the original information to be able to take forward. So I think it's a good use of the academic research to actually feed the PIR to go forward on. So that was my comment.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Andrew.
Thanks. Also supportive of PIR and 18. I think it's good to first get the questions, get the issues before we just try and align. So supportive of that. I do have a concern around 41, just given that the effective date was delayed until January 2023. So we'd only have 3 periods that it's been implemented if adopted in 23. I know it came up prominently at the Standard Setters Forum, so I've got that on the balance. But I guess what my concern is, most of what I heard when people were raising issues around 41 were more interpretation issues rather than issues with the actual standard itself. And so I do worry that individuals will respond to the PIR, but then, feel disappointed perhaps with the outcome and that the standard's not actually going to be there, and that directing these, Ross, I know what you're going to say, to the IAG would be a better routing to go through. So I guess I've got a caution and would perhaps prefer not to put 41 into the PIR for that reason.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for that reminder. And yes, I didn't do the math correctly on that one. So, so at the moment, if taking the comments that we've had, then we would include IPSAS 18, we would include IPSAS 35, but we would then, not include anything 41. But to constituents, if they want to submit to the IAG, Andrew's ready and waiting. So is that reasonable then, that we do include those two through staff working through the editorial group, with the editorial group develop write-ups for potential PIRs on IPSAS 18, IPSAS 35, reflecting the feedback that we've had both in the forum, but I think also through Jens's project in the context of IPSAS 18. So those would be in the document. Karen.
Can I just check whether we're intending to include 20 as well?
So Ross, so I think we agreed back in March that IPSAS 20 would be our pilot project, so that would go ahead anyway. Sorry, but we should reflect that. Good point. Okay. Patricia.
Okay. I think this criteria should be described in the document, because when the jurisdiction respond to the or elaborate the comment letter, need to understand. Okay. The criteria to define what is a PRI need to be better described in the document, because maybe some respondents, you include some projects, consider that it's a financial statement, but in the end of the day it's PRI, or indicate IPSAS 41, but it's not eligible for. Then I think you need to better describe what is priori, and connect with application group, indicate the options to give us information. And another point is, but it's not about the work plan itself, but when during the discussion about the papers today, it's important to understand the characteristics of the entities, because in some way, maybe it's not a standard setup problem.
So I think there's a few things that we'll come back to that are potential on that last point, Patricia. So hold on that. Ross, to Patricia's earlier points.
Yeah, so I think Patricia's right. We would need to give a little more information on what we mean by PIR. And I think the application group, if we're going to note the two mechanisms, we do have the operating procedures that we've drafted already for both those groups that we can publish and link to. And then we'll summarize in a paragraph or two as context for that so that people understand, why 41, for example, is not on there yet, if they were thinking they would expect it.
Thanks, Ross. I think that was the point I was going to make. So we have approved those, haven't we? But we just haven't published them. So I think if we go down that route, that's the instruction to do that, and then we can reference as necessary, and then that gives the context for the projects that we put on there. Being raised in the forum, fitting with the criteria, and then it's up to constituents to comment on those. Okay. I think that's been a very useful discussion just to draw all those things out. Is there anything else anybody wants to say on PIRs before we start to look at the list of financial reporting projects? Okay. So let us move on then to look at the list of financial reporting projects. Sorry, I've lost my papers now. So if we look at the list, which is on page 3 of the previously suggested projects document, and it's split between those not affected by a currently ongoing ISB project and projects currently affected by a current ISB project. I'd like to just take comments first on projects that we've heard about that aren't on that list. I think there will be some updates that need to be made to the descriptions to reflect comments, where it's already on that list. And I think if we can take that as an instruction to staff that that is done, probably, yeah. So are there projects that you've heard about that aren't on that list at the moment? Financial reporting projects at the moment that have come out from discussions. Karen.
I think a number of them are. So intangibles we've heard a lot about is on there. I think there are kind of variants around sort of the financial reporting boundary, what's in what statement, which is maybe not explicitly covered, but part of financial statement discussion and communicating financial reporting, maybe, I'm not sure, but I think there's something in there about to what extent do they overlap. We did, of course, hear about taxonomy. So I think that is something in the financial reporting arena that potentially could be mentioned in there. But that's probably the one. But I think handling the two points that were raised at the forum around the boundaries between different information, I'm not quite sure in my own mind how that fits with the two items that were previously on there, but we probably should be clear about that.
Thanks, Karen. Renee, are you on that? Or are you on a different point? I mean, probably what I'll do is I'll just collect comments then at the moment, and then we'll come back. So Renee, to you.
Yes, thank you. So Karen mentioned intangibles quickly. So what I had in mind is related to intangibles. So we heard about technological asset. We heard about cloud. We heard about technological asset, cloud computing as potentially being projects. We discussed that they may be related to intangibles. So I've been reflecting on how this could be presented in here. So the description of intangible asset it talks about a comprehensive review. It refers to newer types. So maybe there's an opportunity to expand the definition and maybe have two subjects so that we are explicitly reflecting those two subjects that may be part of intangible. So right now, I don't think it's visible enough if we want to reflect that feedback. I think I would put it here, but again, I think I wanted to generate a conversation on that.
Did you want to come back on that, Ross, or Karen's point? Okay, let's just talk about intangibles for a moment specifically, but I want to come back to Karen's point as well. So let's deal with intangibles first.
So I would recommend that these issues that were discussed go as subs to that project, because that's the essence of the I4S project as well, is that technology's changed. Do the standards need to be updated? Because it's not a gap in our literature. If you're dealing with things related to intangible assets, we have a full standard for that. There are principles. The question is, are they operating as designed? So I think it would be confusing to constituents to put a project out there insinuating that there's no guidance that could be applied to these types of transactions, because there fully is today, private and public sector. Question is whether the extent of that guidance needs to change as technologies change so quickly. Are there transactions or outcomes that aren't being appropriately reflected? So I think if we do that as part of that comprehensive project, that's probably a better approach than having a project on digital assets, because people might get confused and think that that's a gap in our guidance, which I don't think is correct.
Okay, thanks for that, Ross. And I mean, the ongoing issue that we're facing as well with this is, of course, the ISB ongoing project. So I think we'll also have more clarity on where that may be going. So if we agree, yes, we specifically reflect those two items then, as Ross has suggested. Okay, so let's now go back to Karen's point, which actually I think then is a sort of manifestation of the potential project that Michelle was talking about. And obviously we have raised the issue around the extent of GPFRs and so on in the consultation document itself. There is a looming issue of what's currently phase 2 of materiality. What status does that have going forwards? And so I think there is the question which Karen has quite rightly raised, is actually, do we want to actually in some way, if you like, brigade, or let's say RPG2 in some different way, or maybe we want to actually brigade all three of the RPGs together. I don't know. I think when we've talked about this before, we've said RPG1 and RPG3 are more obviously candidates potentially to be wrapped in or to become SRSs going forwards. Ross?
I think this one's a tricky one, as we heard in the various discussions, because depending on how you think about it and your experience reporting outside of financial statements, you might have a different view on this. Because at the table, I had the pleasure of sitting at Michelle's table and taking notes for 3 different groups. And I think by the end of it, that future reporting project had been linked to 3 and possibly 4 other projects that we were talking about. So it makes me think of whether in this space we need some sort of a research project where we investigate the broader reporting space alongside our existing guidance and our developing sustainability guidance. Because I recall many times over the last couple of years when we start talking about S1, we quickly get into, well, how might RPG1, long-term fiscal sustainability, RPG3, service performance information, might that sit under there as sustainability guidance? And, where does that sit and where's the place for the RPGs? But I'm not sure we have enough answers yet to really put a pin on what those projects are. So maybe it's asking our constituents if they want us to do some research in that space to better understand what we could do. I know that's a little more academic, but I'd struggle right now to go away and write up a clear project proposal based on what I heard at the table yesterday and the other discussions.
Karen?
I don't know whether perhaps we can do it in a narrative way rather than a project way, because both Eliza's group and Michelle's group were looking at quite similar things. So it's bubbled up in a couple of places, and I think the projects that are on the list don't quite capture what was being discussed yesterday. But I agree with you; it's quite difficult in terms of kind of putting your hands around it at the moment, and sometimes more haste, less speed if we don't kind of describe it right. But maybe there is in terms of bringing forward what came from the forum, maybe there is a narrative way of flushing out this kinds of issue and the kind of debate and discussion that happened without saying there's a project that looks like this. I don't know if that's an alternative way of bringing that forward and making sure that voice has been heard.
So I'm wondering whether perhaps we kind of leave RPG2 under financial reporting projects, but we put it under a separate heading, which is actually something around, mentioning IPSASB's reporting framework. Because I think there's a lot in what you say, Karen, that I think we need to actually understand what the appetite is, for example, on RPG1 and RPG3. And we've sort of steered people in the direction of, well, these could become future, sustainability reporting standards in their own right, or as part of an RPG, as part of an S1 equivalent. But I don't think the board is at a kind of stage yet. And we are going to be able to, in a sense, actually, at some stage, we're going to have to take a decision on what happens with materiality. What status does that have? We're going to have to, and it probably would be useful actually to get constituent input on what they see the future of these projects being, perhaps without tying it too specifically into it has to be this at this stage. Andrew, you want to come in on it?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's broader than just our literature. It's where does our literature fit within the broader landscape as well. So it's not just is RPG1 and RPG3 going to become authoritative. It's yes, how does our literature fit together, but how does that plug into the broader reporting landscape? So I quite like Ross's proposal, actually, that this is a research project at first, that we do go out and try and understand what is happening in the broader space, for example, how are entities currently using our guidance? How would they potentially use if we did have an S1 or if we did make RPGs mandatory? Because if we can understand that environment, then I think we can better actually craft a project out at the end of the day. And I don't know what the output of this would be either. But I think that's why putting it as a research project, and it's not financial, it's not sustainability, it's at a higher level sort of is this. So just to support Ross's proposal.
So if we go with that broad direction, which we would need to say we are going to do this piece of work, but it's not, in a sense, it's not there in the consultation at the moment. I guess that still leaves the kind of point about, there is a question about updating RPG2 because obviously, the ISB has issued an updated version of management commentary, which, then actually you've got the connectivity between sustainability reporting and financial reporting catered for in that. Or I think, as ISB has done it, it's more in the financial reporting bucket, but maybe so if we work in the fact that there will need to be research done about then probably what we need to do is at least put forward the idea that we need to, as a project, specifically update RPG2, but make it clear it's not on the run of the other financial reporting projects. Karen.
I support the idea of a research project on this. I think the question for me, is it a done deal, or do we actually want respondents to come back to us and say, is that a priority for them? So it's another project, but it's a research project, and I feel like identifying it in that way so that it's not necessarily a commitment on for the board and staff. So I think that's a question.
Ross.
So from my perspective, it should be a potential project in the mix. So a research project, I don't think it'd be right to commit to that over other projects and add it in without consultation. Because it will take staff resources, even if it's a research project. The benefit of doing a research project is you're not committing when you put it on your work program on what the output might be or whether you even take it forward, but you're going to understand the issues better and do the first step before you decide that.
So can I just explore the thinking a bit more then? So what's the proposal then in how we deal with that? Because obviously in the way that the formal document is structured at the moment, we actually have proposals on financial reporting, sustainability reporting, and PIRs. We don't have research projects in that area. So Ross.
Maybe as an overarching project on related to, let's say, connectivity between financial statements and where our existing guidance that we have in the broader reporting space sits in relation to coming sustainability guidance and financial reporting guidance. We'd have to go in and think about it a little bit. It's kind of on the spot, but if you give us instruction to go away and think about it, we can
Okay.
get the for it.
So in terms of a proposed way forward on this, then I'm hearing support for the fact that we do need to propose a research project, which is on the sort of overarching future. It's not future reporting, but it's sort of in that space. So we need staff to actually go away and have a look at that, but also to come back with a proposal which is specifically how do we locate it in the document itself, and then linked to that, how do we address the potential update of RPG2? People okay with that? Patricia?
Okay with this, but I'd like to clarify one point about the financial report projects, because I understand if I have a standard, this standard is a candidate for the PRI, not for financial statement project. It's for me, it's very confusing yet. In this case, the IPSASB relate to provisions in tangible assets. Why not PRI?
Ross?
I guess the question is, what's the PRI on? PIR, sorry. That's a terrible acronym. Because is it RPGs as a whole? I think we'd have to think about it a bit, but
I mean, it isn't a classic PIR, because the PIR is looking at an existing standard in terms of, is it operating as the board intended when it set that standard? And the point about this is actually that it's a broader concept, which is actually, now that we have, or hopefully we will have relatively shortly, a sustainability reporting standard, then what are the implications of that change in our standard setting remit and architecture, in terms of our existing literature, and do we carry on having RPGs? Do we have something different? So it's not a PIR as such. It's about what is it's a bit more strategic than that in terms of what is the architecture of our standards going forwards, which is, I think, why Ross has proposed that actually it's a research project, and the board would need to work its way through that and come up with some recommendations, and likely there would be some form of consultation paper or something like that that came out of that, and then we would need, as a board, to take decisions on what the future might be of specific pieces of guidance. And again, you'd need to consult on those. So it's not a narrow piece of work. It's actually potentially quite broad. I mean, there isn't really a precedent for doing this. You have to go back to when we were doing when we started developing RPGs, we had a similar discussion about what is the status of these documents. And at that point in time, and he's disappeared, but there was quite an intense board debate, and we arrived at a temporary quotes compromise, and this is going back to 2013, about these documents having a separate status. But that was then, this is now, and this is proposing a broader review, I think, Ross. So it doesn't conveniently fit anywhere. Okay, so I'm conscious of, Abdullah, I'm conscious of time. What I want to do is just conclude the discussion in terms of financial reporting projects. Then we will take our coffee break, and then we will come back and talk about sustainability reporting. Abdullah.
Thank you, Ian, and I will do everything possible to delay your coffee break because I'm not in that.
I think you're on mute, Abdullah, or not. The microphone's not working.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then a couple of thoughts around that, but my first thing, if we're gonna start a research project, I would want to see the link between it and our strategy. Where does it fit in there? If I'm starting anything, because our strategy was out there, it was approved by the board. We got the comments from the constituents, and it is approved. It's at that stage. So if we want to start anything now as a research, we want to tie it up to that. But again, why would we think of such? Was something new emerged, like in a discussion around the forum? Any of our constituents brought that? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Why would we want to do that in linkage of the pillars of our strategy? The other thing that I would say that I'm coming from an application and practice point of view. I don't think if I was if it was for me that talking about the RPGs, whether to make it authoritative or not, I would go with not, because I would focus first about with the jurisdiction doing the adoption and fixing or addressing the issues that they happen with their implementation issues. If you talk to me or any of the jurisdictions that I've been talking with, I would be willing to start something with consolidation. I would be willing to start issues talking about intangible assets, but going through the RPGs and making it mandatory or authoritative, that I'm sitting on the fence on that, but I don't know if I would vote for something like that. But those are my thoughts from an application point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, Abdullah. So I think on your first point, I mean, there's no doubt about the fact that we would have to link this to, I mean, the strategy is delivering global standards, and this is absolutely in line with that. So there's no question about that. And it is a development since, we actually approve the strategy. It's a more detailed, how do we implement that question? So I think we need to sit it in that, within that context, very much to avoid the kind of confusion for our constituents that Abdullah was expressing there. In terms of the IS-38 issue, I think, we know this is very difficult in terms of how do you formulate this, what might the scope of the work be, not only from a public sector perspective, and that has ramifications potentially around the debate we've had about COV, but also how do we take it forward? Do we take it forward? If the ISB hasn't completed its project, we don't want to get ahead of them. There's a whole nest of issues around this. And that what that would mean is if our constituents come back and say, we do want you to take forward an update of, fundamental update of the intangibles standard, we would then need to actually do some further research at that stage and then actually come up with a very clear project brief for how we might approach that. So I think this is difficult, but actually we're saying, do you want us to look at this, bearing in mind the call on resources? And that's really the question that we're asking at the moment. We're not asking how would we approach it? How do you advise us to do that? We're just asking, do you want to allocate scarce board and staff time to this area? Is it sufficient project? So I think that, and that doesn't alter the questions that we've got. We just need at this stage not to get ahead of that. We're saying, do you want us to do something in this space? And then if you do, then we'll work that out. Okay. I hesitate to say, is there anything else that we need to say on financial reporting projects at this stage? My proposal would be that we break at this stage and then we'll come back and have a look at the list of potential sustainability projects. So we are 10 minutes behind at this point. So if we can come back at 3:30 Portugal time. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back into the discussion that we were having before the break. So we have the list of sustainability projects in the staff document. So again, I'm on page 3. So I think there's no doubt about the fact that we had a lot of discussion and debate about general sustainability related disclosures. So if there's any need to update the discussion, I think that's taken as read that will need to go ahead in that document. And that will be under the editorial group. So with that proviso, can I open up then for comments and discussions on what we have there? And particularly, I guess, obviously it was explicitly called biodiversity in the discussions, but we have nature-related disclosures. Discuss. Renee, lead us off.
Yes, thank you. Just reflecting on some of the conversations we heard yesterday. So an S1 project or general sustainability related disclosure project would by default also have the PPP angle to it, the public policy program related to it. And I know we started doing public policy program under climate. I mean, you do it under climate, you do it under the broader sustainability. In my view, it belongs at both levels. So maybe what I would do here at a minimum is probably just elaborate that a public sector project leveraging S1 would also consider the various roles, if we don't want to say PPP, like the dual role of a government and a sovereign government or an institution. So I'm just reflecting on the fact that it would reflect what we heard over the past couple of days, and it would just maybe improve here the clarity of what we're thinking about under this project. That's a thought.
Ross, do you want to pick up on those comments?
Yeah, just a couple of things, just stepping back before we move on from where we are on phase 2 of climate and PPPs. So firstly, we do have a number of comments we've heard from constituents that we haven't gone through in detail. So we do need to finish going through those comments as per our due process. That project is part of the funding we've got from World Bank, that to achieve our funding goals, we need to get to the end of going through the comments and decide what we're going to do with that. So I don't think we can now pivot and throw S1 in advance of doing that work. That would be, so we need to be careful we're not signaling that, is my view. I think, like we've said throughout when we made the decision, we get to December and approve phase 1 and have the climate related risks and opportunities disclosures, then we need to move in 2026 into looking at the guidance of what we heard on public policy programs, decide what to do next there. And then whether or not we bring on the S1 project is a resource issue on whether we have the resources to do that. From a resource perspective, we do expect we'll get Celine back at some point next year at the end of her maternity leave. Exact timing's not known yet, but we should have a little bit more sustainability resource. We still have the World Bank resources, and we have another staff member, Karen, who's working hard on sustainability as well. So I just wanted to set the resource scene in the context of funding for the specific work we've done and where we actually are in due process on the proposals we put out in ED1, and that we don't get ahead of the process and what we're meant to do with the feedback we receive from our constituents.
So Renee, back on that. Sorry, I just wanted to have a look at what we've included in the document in terms of, so at the moment, what we have in the actual consultation document is that we have split sustainability, the climate related disclosures project in 2. and the document clearly shows that. And I think the challenge we've got is that we need to analyse those responses before we decide what do we do with those, let alone how do we actually address it in terms of the architecture. So I think we've just got to be very careful about the description that goes with the potential S1 project. Karen.
I understand the sensitivities there, but just pushing back slightly on that, I agree that you need to analyse the responses from the ED that's been out already. But in looking at those responses, we might reach the decision that actually it's better to go back and look at a general reporting framework first, rather than pressing ahead. And I just want to check in with that because, particularly as we've heard a lot of support for the general framework, and there is a risk of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. But clearly, we need to understand what constituents' concerns were before reaching that conclusion. I'm just wanting to put on the table that we don't preclude it, and that obviously in terms of framing what goes in this document, it should allow that if that's the conclusion that we reach, having been informed by the analysis of the responses.
I mean, just taking a step back on this, we will go out to consultation on this and we will get responses back on this, and then the board will have to need to discuss and debate how we take it forward. Equally, during the first half of next year, if we follow the project plan, then we're going to have to, or the board is going to have to, actually analyse the responses on public policy programmes. And it's only when we've been through both of those projects, both of those processes, that we can decide, do they connect, do they not connect, what is the relative scheduling at that point in time. So I think, it's one of those things where actually we need to actually ask our constituents, do you want an S1 equivalent? When we start elaborating on that, well, we might do it with this, we might do it with that, we might, because, so it all starts to get very muddy, and I think we just need to ask the question straight and then see what comes back out of that, and then do the analysis in the meantime. And then, we'll have to take those decisions, but we don't need to put that out at the moment. Renee, you raised the point originally.
Yes, I just want to clarify that I totally agree with the work program, the way it's presented and the way we're executing it. All I was suggesting is that we acknowledge that any general sustainability related project disclosure project would have a public policy program angle to it, and like we've done with RPG3, with RPG1, we're saying this project could also entail. So what I heard from the feedback I heard during the forum is that made me realize, it clarified in my mind that an S1 project, like a climate project, would also consider PPP. And that's all I'm saying. It's just a signal to our constituent that we're already acknowledging that that this would be the public sector specific, one of the public sector specific consideration. But if the board believes that there's a risk to doing that, it was just a sentence I was thinking of putting in.
I mean, looking at the description that's in there at the moment, you could potentially add a sentence that, there may be a need to pick up the broader aspects of public policy programs, and leave it at that, so that it acknowledges the point but doesn't commit anything at this stage. So if you're okay with that, then I'd suggest we go down that route, because then it just leaves it entirely open. Mike, are you in on this?
So thank you, Chair. So for myself, I'm quite fine with the birth program as it is, even leaving public policy programs here phase 2 in that list, because I think we must be very careful. We received feedback from 96 constituents, which is by number even more, which was here in the room, and even down not talking about the heads lying behind that 96 comment letters. And even I think we committed ourselves very clearly acknowledging it dual role, the need for that, and now it's a question of detail. And even if we think it consistently to an end, it would also, struggling with doing the first sustainability reporting standard before the general requirements, because if we say, okay, we do first gender, then the concrete standard, that means we had to stop the current standards, because first doing the general standard. So I'm fine with that. Maybe, in fact, it makes to a certain extent sense to develop that, let's say, type in parallel, so to learn from each side. That might have benefits, but I don't know whether it would be feasible in terms of resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Mary?
Thank you. I'm a similar view with Luna, and
You need to pull the mic closer.
Yes. We have to pay much attention to the public sector specific feature, and so I'm in the confusion in the S1 aligned, and so because there is some terminology, strategy and business strategy and operational model, and based on the RPG 3. However, there is so different aspect in the strategy in the private sector and the business model and the private sector. And so we have to interpret the different definition about the public sector specific policy, public policy program aspect. And so it is a so important, significant point of to prepare, provide the sustainability report. And thank you.
Thanks, Murray. I mean, I think the approach we've established is that we will use our rules of the road process to build on IFRS foundation literature. That's what we've done with climate. We've tested that. We've seen that actually we think an aligned approach works okay for what we were formerly talking about as own operations. Public policy programs is public sector specific, and therefore I think the challenge we're all having, and I'm sure our constituents will have, is actually to what extent will the relevant bits of existing guidance or the thinking that we put into PPPs be relevant. And the only way in which we're going to resolve that is partly to listen to the input that we get, and then to actually take the results of the analysis of the PPP responses that we got and work out what we think the appropriate way to structure the project's actually going to be. And that could well be then, that taking we're not going to stay totally aligned, we're going to adapt because we need to add guidance, we need to change what's there and so on. But I think what we need to be careful not to do at this stage is overthink where we might get to when we've A, heard from constituents, and B, we've done the detailed analysis and debated what feedback we've already had on public policy programs. And as long as we've got the appropriate sort of latitude in there, if people want us to do a framework project, okay, then we decide how do we do it. Do we take climate related public policy programs forward as a separate piece of guidance? There's a whole range of different decisions. And in line with what we've been doing recently, we will need to do a period of research before we come up with a project brief that then gets discussed with the board before we move forward. So I think your caveat is very much noted, Mary. We need to work through that process first. I think what we have agreed is we will allow just an extra line that says, it may be necessary to pick up guidance on the wider aspects of PPPs because we've only considered climate related. So it doesn't, preclude a range of approaches if we do that. It notes it, but doesn't tie us down on that. And then we will need to go through that process. Sunjin?
Thank you, Chair. And I have slightly different point of view from Marie and Renee about the importance or scope of PPP. I think the PPP is important, especially important for climate, because it is climate. In case of climate, own operation is something unique. But if we are talking about sustainability reporting for other items, for example, biodiversity, I think everything the government have to report is PPP. It's about it's from the public policy programs, because that's the role of government. So there will not be own operation and PPP for biodiversity and other sustainability related issues. Then the issue will be only about the standard setting for those items. But in case of climate, we need to report government own operation aspect of greenhouse gas emission or things like that. So from that angle, I don't see the merit of delaying or changing priority about PPP. I think we are going the right direction of setting up a standard for own operation first, and then complete by adding a different dimension of PPP for climate only. In case of PPP for other aspect, I think that's the issue for the separate standard setting when those issues emerges. So from maybe I'm the minority from here about separating own operation and PPP, but I think that own operation and PPP separation is unique, something for the climate only. So
I think you need to come back and make that comment in about 6 months' time, actually, Sunjin, when we've actually gone through the process of consulting and we've analysed the comments on climate-related public policy programs. Genuinely, I think we cannot answer that question at the moment, nor should we actually attempt to answer that because due process-wise, we need to have done the analysis before we can, and we need to have heard what our constituents say. I'll take Noyati if you're on this, but actually then I think we've had enough discussion. I think we can accommodate this point about the fact we know we need to decide what to do with PPPs. Are they separate? Are they part of a framework? There's a range of things, but we cannot come to a conclusion at the moment. So I think if you're okay, we'll add that point, that sentence, and then we'll leave it at that till we've done the analysis and we've heard. So Noyati, final point, and then I'm moving us on.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to raise about the what's Marie been pointed out. It's about the definition of policy programs, which I'm coming from the government entity. There is a other public sector which is more smaller, whether they just maybe carry out the policy, but the entity should know whether they have to report both on operation and the policy, or they just have to report only one its own operation. But mostly all entity have their own operation, but the thing is on the policy. So I think we need to have the clear definition on what does it mean by policy, public policy program, and who actually, maybe by illustrative, who is the one who issued that policy for the other entity to carry on their own operation. Thank you.
Thanks, Noyeti. I mean, I think that point came up as well. That reinforces the point that a number of people made in the responses. So again, I think we will deal with that when we do the analysis of the responses, and then we can form a conclusion on that. But I think that is not a now point. That is a 6 months' time when we've done that analysis and we have the feedback on this consultation. So if I can take us back then to the list on page 3. So we know we need to add that sentence to the description then on the General Sustainability Disclosures Project. Nature-related disclosures, I just want to pause on that at the moment. Do we mean biodiversity or do we mean something different? And again, it probably comes to how it's written up, but we've had research on biodiversity coming in, so I think we just need to be clear on how we're going to describe it. Noyati, you're still in? Okay. So Renee, back to you.
I was asking myself the exact same question, but then when I came back and I refreshed my understanding of what we wrote. I mean, we are referring to the biodiversity. We are referring to the biodiversity project by the IPSASB. We acknowledge that what we call nature-related disclosure is akin to biodiversity, but we're not sure yet what the scope of our project will be, what theirs will be. So with all that uncertainty, I thought we had it right, because since the beginning, since we kicked off natural resources, we've always meant to have this phase 2 project, right? So calling it nature related, I already feel we moved away from just natural resources. Right now it's nature, it's not biodiversity. So, but I'm fine with it. I think it's a general enough term. I think we're reflecting biodiversity will be considered, and wherever this project ends, we don't know today. It's way too early days. So I asked myself the same question and then convinced myself that we were quite good with what we had right now. That's my comment.
Thanks, Renee. Sorry, I was just flipping to the page where we've actually got that description. Okay, so we're probably more or less there, aren't we, in terms of that description? Maybe we'll just get staff to see if there's any finessing on the wording in that. Okay, so is everybody happy that we keep it as Renee's proposing at nature-related disclosures for the reasons? Okay, so are there any other points anybody wants to make on the list of projects then for sustainability reporting? Renee, you were hovering. I was just go ahead.
Actually, it was a broader point. Like I was waiting for us to be done, but I can raise it now.
Well, we're going to go into the main document anyway in a minute, but
it's on the it's the title. It's the title. I've been reflecting on whether it makes sense. I would at a minimum delete previously, because I find that word doesn't work anymore given where we've been and the journey we've taken, especially in the past days. And then I'm looking at suggested, and I think some of us during the tea break talked about maybe a potential project. Potential is suggested, seems worse suggesting, and potential seems softer to me. But yes, so I wanted to bring this up as part of the conversation.
I can't see an objection to calling it potential projects. That's fairly. Does anybody else subject to that? I know we've been, as ever, I hate it when we discuss titles as a board because it always goes backwards and forwards and everybody has a different view, but understand Renee's point. So are we okay with potential projects? Karen?
I know that when we previously discussed this, I really didn't like potential because we were talking about projects that were 2 years old and we had no idea about whether they were still valid or not. I think now that we're bringing in more current discussions, it seems more appropriate. But like I said earlier, I think we need to differentiate between the ones that came up at this forum that are more current and perhaps more potential than the ones that have been previously came up, which nobody, there were a few on financial reporting that nobody has mentioned over the last day and a half. So suggesting that they might be potential projects, it leaves me slightly more uncomfortable around that. I did want to make one other point on sustainability.
Sorry, so are you okay with potential projects?
As long as we can split out the ones that are really old.
I mean, I think we can put an asterisk in.
Yeah, I think something to identify the fact that actually they're not, they're not ones that are currently anyone told us over the last day and a half were top of the list, because I think otherwise that creates a perception that perhaps didn't reflect what we heard over the last day and a half. So that's my concern there.
Okay, so it's potential projects now. Right.
Can I just raise one other point just on the sustainability list? I was just going through my notes about what we heard in the feedback and whether there was anything that we didn't cover. And the only thing that we haven't covered, and I don't quite know how we deal with, is the Indigenous perspectives. So that was something that was raised in the feedback groups that I don't think we've captured in the discussion that we've had so far. I'm not quite sure where we fit it in, but it was feedback that we received.
Dave, do you want to pick that up? Because I think it's part of our process now, actually.
You took the words from my mouth. So what we began this year, and it was part of a UN event that happened in New York. We consulted with Indigenous leaders from around the world and ensured that we brought that feedback to the board so it would be considered as part of our climate project and our tangible natural resources project. So my view would be similar to Ian's. I don't think it's a separate project, but it's part of our process now in consulting.
I mean, I think the problem we've had before is actually there hasn't, I mean, there's literally hundreds of different Indigenous peoples, probably thousands actually. I think there's about 600 in Canada or something like that alone. But the UN group gave us a group that was formally constituted that actually gave us a sounding board that we could use. Andrew.
Sorry, just wanted to clarify the Indigenous perspectives. I understood my interpretation of it. There was two impacts. One is how do we take it into account in our processes, which I think, Dave, is what you were talking about. But also, is it something that should be in our standards, that users of our standards, when they're preparing sustainability reports, do take that into account as well? And that's more explicit in our standards.
I think we have to be very careful about that, because I think we need to respect those perspectives, but actually it's not for us to set ourselves up as the standard setter for Indigenous peoples. And why would we not then say, well, we're setting standards for other groups of people? So I think we've got to be very careful not to hold ourselves out as that. And in a sense, actually, I think it's a really important development, the fact that we now have a way of actually formally, consulting a group that contains those perspectives. And in a sense, I think we have to see where that goes actually at this stage. I'm not aware of other standard setting group boards, international boards that are actually using that group. So in a sense, we're ahead on that. But I think we have to be very careful not to presume that we can represent, because actually then it's potentially a very wide-ranging project, because essentially you'd be doing a sort of, equivalent of IFRS for SMEs for Indigenous peoples, potentially. So I think it's at the moment, I would just suggest that we keep it to, this is part of our process. Okay. So I think we're now done on the document now known as potential projects. So if we can move back then on to the main work program consultation document. Dave, to you, I think, on this.
We're moving to agenda item 3.2.2. I listed the changes that were made to the document resulting from either comments from the board, some advice from the PIC, and then there's for discussion advice from the CAG, and then for discussion will be advice from the PIC. I think we take these as a whole, Ian. They're pretty editorial in nature, some related to coloring, some related to editorials in the program technical director section. So I would take them as a whole, and then we can move into the advice from the PIC I can go to in a little more detail.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So comments on the issues or the process discussed in paper 3.2.2. Yeah, Andrew.
Thanks. No comments on the process per se, but just my understanding based on the PIC advice is that our potential project list is now a staff document. When going through the document, it wasn't clear to me that this is a staff document. We normally indicate it's got slightly different branding, etc. So just queried whether that was going to be updated or not.
Dave?
So absolutely, Andrew, it will be updated, or that's the plan anyway. It's the timing, because we get these documents designed, there's a timing lag between when the PIC comments come in and when we can get a design document back. But my suggestion would be the potential projects document. We'll add in the introduction that this is developed based on information heard from the staff over its outreach opportunities.
Okay, thanks. So I think there's, that's an instruction that we need to make that differentiation. Renee.
Yes, thank you. In agenda paper 7, the approach to materiality guidance for sustainability reporting. We're proposing in there, we're suggesting option 1, which would be to accelerate the start of phase 3 materiality. And that one of the consequences of this might be the delay of starting phase 2. And that's a decision we will be making tomorrow. And if we decide to go that way, if there is in fact a delay in starting phase 2, if it's in fact just a flip between the two, then I think we would just want to put a placeholder here that we may have to change this subject to tomorrow's deliberation.
I think that's a good point, Renee. I think there should be a general point I should make that on Friday, when Ross updates his program and technical director's report and the work program, I'll have to align the diagram in here with that.
Thanks, Dave. Karen.
Thank you. It's a question more than anything else, because we heard in the feedback that we got from the Standard Setters Forum, I think, as I said earlier on, that people would kind of like a pause a little bit in terms of standard setting and support in terms of implementation. And if staff are supporting implementation, then they can't be doing projects. And I wondered to what extent that should or could be reflected in this document, because at the moment it's, well, we'd do project A or project B, but actually there's another trade-off here in terms of how much support there is for implementation in terms of what staff are able to support. And of course that implementation support could be quite light touch rather than heavy, but I wondered if there's some kind of signal or question or point that we should make that, that the amount of resource available to do projects could be dependent on the level of implementation support. And maybe there's a question about that in terms of understanding what constituents need.
I think it's quite an awkward discussion to have, actually, because it's not a specific project. And I agree with you. I think there was a clear message that came from constituents about the need to think about what might be done in this space, but then there's a range of things that might be done. Ross.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're actually in a very bad space. As if you remember last year when we were finalizing the new strategy, we've already started to adjust the work program to have implementation supportability. So that was adding in the application group, and we now allocate resources to do that each quarter. That was adding the ability to start post-implementation reviews. And that was acknowledging on sustainability that when we finish standards, we also will have to continue to have ongoing staff resources allocated to supporting implementation in the way the ISSB has been doing. So that's reflected on this program here. And I take the point that people over the last couple of days, and maybe close to our program and many that aren't, are telling us you have to take the foot off the gas. But I don't think that means stopping what we've already committed and started on our work program. I think it's balancing in 2026 when we add new projects, the needs of implementation, maintaining our standards, and finishing off our commitments. So this reflects what the staff resourcing can do. This reflects decisions we've made so far on projects. Aside from the materiality issue that was raised, this is like the team applied to projects and what we can do.
I mean, I think the issue then is that there is, if you like, what we are consulting on is the top half of our strategy. So it's delivering global standards. What we've heard about is actually really in the space in terms of inspiring adoption and implementation. And so therefore, I think there may be a slight caveat that's required in terms of the resource available, that just as a placeholder, if you like, so that actually there's a possibility of actually having some discussion about the options that might be around and what commitment that would mean in terms of staff resources from the board, which would then have the impact on the choice of projects. So I think probably what I'd advocate for is we just need to make a slight, and I think it's somewhere around
I'd say go to page 5 and read the highlighted text below the box.
Yeah.
We can update there, but that's basically trying to get across the point that we have a finite amount of resources, and this is what's committed, and this is the area we're working, and the white space is what we'll have available. And
I mean, I think the trouble is if we go out with a proposal, everybody will say, yes, do that. And with no kind of, it's a blank check sort of thing. So, Karen.
I think that might be the solution if in that asterisk text under the box, it also acknowledges implementation support. It's just flagging it as much as anything. I think that works.
Okay, so I think we just tweak the text so there's a placeholder there in that respect. Okay. Dave, anything else on 3.2.2 you'd like to just call out at all before we...
Andrew already touched on one of the pieces of advice from the PIC, and that was they wanted to understand the board's process around the potential projects document. And the board had started to talk about this in July, how it was less and less of a board document, but that comment from the PIC for me really crystallized that this really was a staff document. And that was why the recommendation was to move to that. The other comment that we received from the PIC relates more to approval, but I'll touch on it now. And They want to make sure that the IPSASB had a robust consultation process with all groups, particularly around middle income and low income countries. And the recommendation there was to extend the comment period to make sure that we could have a robust discussion with all our constituents. But I'll leave that discussion for approval and the exposure period.
Okay, thanks. And I think it also goes to the proposed outreach program and so on to take advantage of that extended period if that's what the board agrees. So, any other comments then in terms of the main strategy document, bearing in mind we've already walked through this and looked at the drafting, so there's only incremental changes have been made. I think we have really sort of 3 points that we picked up in terms of the discussion so far. So I think there's Renee's caveat in terms of we need to have the discussion about the approach we take on materiality going forwards. I think there's the tweak on the drafting for Karen's point, and then there's also the piece of drafting that we need to insert in terms of the proposal that we do that piece of research in terms of the reporting framework going forwards. So I want to check that we've now got the comments that we will need to just see those bits I think of drafting, not in the format, but we will need some proposals from staff, and then I'm proposing that we actually get to approval on this on Friday, and staff will put the proposed changes up by way of slide rather than turning them around in the document. And obviously then there's whatever comes out of the discussion on materiality. So I want to check, is there anything else anybody thinks is relevant at this stage? Patricia.
And about the discussion that you have before to better elaborate the text about the PRI.
That will come. That's one of the things that's one of the 3 pieces. That's the research proposal. It's not a PIR. It's a separate piece of research because PIRs are specifically on existing standards, whereas this is a general piece of research. So can we have that discussion when this comes back on Friday? And I'll ask staff just to show you the drafting in the interim and have that discussion, because I don't want to go through this. Is it a PR or not? Is that okay? Sorry. Okay. Sorry, Ross, you go back.
So you're referring to the updated text in the staff document. We'll be making those changes. We're talking about the changes to the core consultation document. So the one on PIR and the one on application group and the link to the procedures we're going to put in the staff document.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead. I mean,
okay,
just with the caveat, though, that we will make it clear that it is a separate document and it's a staff document.
Okay, it's a separate document, but in this document that is IPSASB, you'll be approved. I think you need to 2 3 phrases to better elaborate what is PRI, only this, and indicate the criteria that are used to define what is PRI.
I mean, wait and see the drafting that comes back. But the thing that we haven't done at the moment, which is needed, is we haven't actually published the document that we approved, I think probably back in last December, which is actually what our process is for PIRs. So we absolutely need to make sure that that's out there because it's a missing piece at the moment. That's okay. Okay. I think now we have a way forward then in terms of Friday, we will see the additional pieces of drafting for the actual formal strategy document that the board will approve. The actual detailed changes on the projects will come back, will be dealt with through an editorial group offline because it's a staff document. It's not something that the board's reporting on. Okay. Right. So I think at this stage, let's at least start the discussion on IPSAS 33. And Dave, is that you? Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Chair. So what I'll do again, I'll give a brief update on where we are. So we first started looking at responses to the exposure draft in March of this year. And broadly, the proposals were strongly supported. We came back in June with one issue that was identified in March, and that relates to recognition and measurement of assets and or liabilities on a gradual basis. And the board at that time asked us to go back and do more research on that topic. So that's what we've done. And that's the one outstanding item. The board approved everything else in June. So the one item to discuss will be the recognition and measurement on a gradual basis. And I think I'll go through that next. So just taking a quick step back, and this is to kind of take a sense check of what IPSAS 33 is supposed to do. IPSAS 33, while it's in the broader suite of IPSAS standards, it does stand apart in that it is helping jurisdictions that are usually either on a cash basis or a modified accrual basis get to an accrual basis of accounting. So it's definitely not the first step in that process when a jurisdiction decides to apply accrual accounting, and by extension, IPSAS in most cases. They don't apply, or they shouldn't apply IPSAS 33 from day one. They have to go and update their IT systems. They have to go and make sure that they have the appropriate resources in place to make sure they can actually do that adoption. That can be years before they actually get to the implementation of IPSAS 33. But when you get to that transition phase, which is the middle section of that slide, that's generally where you're applying IPSAS 33. IPSAS 33, if it's followed to the letter of the law, only applies for 3 years, and you're expected to transition over that time. And when you get to the end of the IPSAS 33 period, you should be on full IPSAS. During the period that you're applying IPSAS 33, you're not complying with IPSAS. So you couldn't get an audit opinion that says you are applying with IPSAS. I just wanted to make that clear and take a step back because the broader conceptual framework that applies to the rest of IPSAS doesn't apply to IPSAS 33. IPSAS 33 is trying to get those stakeholders onto IPSAS standards and in compliance generally with what's in the conceptual framework. So I just wanted to make that clear because I know we're having some discussions in June about kind of the technical interpretation, and we don't need to be technically sound with what's in the conceptual framework when we're applying IPSAS 33. Do you want me to stop there for a second?
No, it's just you carry on in terms of that.
So where that takes us to is a change that the board made trying to clarify first-time adoption of IPSAS when they moved from IPSAS 33 to the new version of IPSAS 33. And what we did was we added implementation guidance to explain how to apply a paragraph in IPSAS 33. And what a number of our respondents indicated was that the interpretation that the board developed, and this was non-authoritative guidance, limited how they had previously applied IPSAS 33. And they indicated that the project was not designed to change any of the principles. It was ultimately designed to make the literature clearer to read, easier to apply. And they said by adding IGC2 in this case was a more restrictive way of interpreting that paragraph. When I looked at this, I went back to my point that the board wasn't trying to change any of the principles. It wasn't trying to change practice. And as a result, what the staff recommendation was to, in the core text, move back to what was there and what was originally in IPSAS 33. And then in the illustrative example, or the implementation guidance that created this more restrictive interpretation for some jurisdictions, we broaden that and show that there are 2 interpretations in practice. My last point was that there's no need to add more disclosure requirements. The current disclosure requirements I think are sufficient to require any appropriate disclosure under either interpretation of this paragraph.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Abdullah, can I go to you as Task Force Chair for any additional comments that you want to make at this stage?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing from my side besides what's been said by Dave, other than after June meeting, we went back to some of the responses from constituents. We found some of them, they highlighted the same issue, and they were looking for this particular subject to be included there. We, as Dave was mentioning, we're not changing anything in the subject. Plus, IPSAS 33 comes after lots of preparation, lots of work that been done, not necessarily a technical accounting issues rather than a preparation phase, and that is the phase that it takes. On average, when we looked with different jurisdictions, on average 5 to 7 years minimum for some bigger jurisdictions. Other than this, I've talked about this in June, where we applied it, and we thought it was really logical. And even from perspective of people not accounting, when you present financial statements to transitional financial statements and using the term transitional, it helped us with moving the project forward. Other than this, nothing other than what Dave was mentioning.
Thanks, Abdullah. So I think, you know, this is reflecting the fact that this is not about the application of IPSAS. It's about the derogation in the period until you get to full IPSAS adoption. So I think last time round we had quite a theoretical discussion. This time round, I'd just like to open up first for comments from those who have recently implemented IPSAS or are in the process of implementing IPSAS, because I think it's really important that we understand the practicalities of implementation, and that's really what IPSAS 33 is trying to facilitate. So if anybody who's on the road to IPSAS or recently implemented IPSAS, that would be helpful to understand. Kamira, lead us off, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Dave, for that summary. Definitely what we identified is that with ED 91, from the comments of constituents, we identified that there were two different interpretations from the standards. There are those people that think that they can apply start implementing IPSAS gradually, and there are those that say, no, you should, if you do it, you should do it on a class-by-class basis. So the standard as it is right now, it is silent in saying this is prohibited to do it a gradual approach or not. So what the proposal is doing here is trying to clarify that both approaches are allowed. So, and in this way, preparers can better implement these standards. We also took a look to the comments received. So we received for this particular ED 21 comments, and we specifically asking SMC1 about the gradual approach. And more than 50% of those responses are explicitly supporting the use of the gradual approach. And they mention what are the benefits. They say that it allows flexibility. They also allow people to focus, so to reduce the administrative burden, to say, wow, I have a pressure that I need to be compliant with everything immediately, and rather that they can use their scarce resources on a gradually phase and do a more efficient implementation. So that is written in the comment letters there. So, and I personally, in my experience, also supporting countries implementation of IPSAS for the first time and the use of IPSAS 33, definitely there is a need for clarity, because I have seen also in practice that different interpretations between auditors and preparers. So if we just clarify that both approaches are allowed according to the reality of the entity, the reality of the jurisdiction, and I think we are doing something good and improving the value added of this IPSAS 33 standard. Thanks.
Thank you, Kamira. So anybody else then? Noyati.
Actually, what the journey of adaptation of ED IPSAS 33 is just like Dave said. Before we start adoption for transition period, we actually already have the preparation time, and then after that, we try to use a class by class during that time, but won't it cannot achieve because as what Camera said, we have limit of resources to do that. And then another thing, we do have an asset registrar, but they are not accounting kind of system, and some more they sometimes they don't have the basic documentation of the ownership, and then there's a lot of issue on that thing. Then we put some other layers of confirmation, asking internal auditor to look into it, and then after they verify, then we put it into our system. That's actually we begin with the phase of the preparation first. When we do the migration into the first time adoption, we still have that issue of documentation is not enough. There is no asset is not registered. Asset is not registered in that particular asset management system. So I think from that experience, because we try to do it class by class or category by category, but we cannot do it, so we decide to do it gradually. And before, actually, when we did the first phase on preparation of the assets information, actually it's more or less 80% of our asset is there. But the thing is about the documentation, the location, whether the asset exists or not is on, we have to verify. Otherwise, it will be, garbage in, garbage out. Then the same result will be, is it maybe qualified audit report? It is the same result will be, maybe would be, so that's why I support that, this, suggestion that we have a choice option to do, as long as the information is available, whether you can do it class, whether you can be categorized or mixed between them, as long as the information is available on that on 3 years time. Yeah.
Thanks, Noyati. Jonah.
Yes, just to share what Yuat has just pointed out, I think it's this two interpretation is quite practical. Most governments are going concern, even as we transition from cash to accrual. Some information, particularly for assets, they come in available during the course of doing business. You don't have to wait. For instance, for us, for the fixed assets, we were planning for it to come in on the third year. Since we are going concern, of course, we keep on purchasing assets as we go along. So we don't have to wait for the third year for us to recognize those assets. So this interpretation is very helpful in a practical way. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonah. Over here, Adrian.
Well, in this instance, we need to be pragmatic. We want IPSAS 33 to be implemented sincerely and effectively. And based on my experience as an external auditor in a large military alliance, I can say that it took them more than 15 years to identify, recognize, and measure a vast collection and panel of military assets. And of course, they were qualified as non-compliant for so many years with IPSAS, but they didn't care to be qualified. They just, went on doing the job. With a constant will to, effectively recognize these assets. And this is what's important. What's important, and the graduality of recognition is probably something that help the presenters, the preparers, to have, I mean, a sort of support from the IPSAS scheme to help them, okay, go down the lane of recognizing and measuring the assets. Otherwise, I mean, they won't do it effectively, or they won't do it properly. So this is a pragmatic position.
Thanks, Adrian. And I think it's important to say that obviously at the end of the 3-year period, this is a derogation for that 3-year period only. So if the jurisdiction hasn't actually, completed the transition by the end of the 3-year period, then there's going to be some form of qualification that's going to result, because at that stage, you've gone through the 3-year derogation and necessarily you will be on the full version of IPSAS 45 or whatever. And therefore, if you don't comply, then there would be a qualification on that. So, it's very much the 3 years that we're talking about here. So I think we've heard from those who are implementing. I'll take other comments at this stage. So I think, Karen, were you first and then to Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. And I know I was one of the people who in previous sessions sort of expressed some concerns about this. And it's been great to be able to talk to other people. And I thought your introduction, Dave, was particularly helpful in positioning this standard against others, because my concern was about the integrity of the suite of the standards rather than lack of empathy for this position, because having been through it, it is tricky, it is difficult. You have to be pragmatic, and I completely support that. I think if there is any, and I think I might have made this point last time, is I think it needs to be clear that it's one direction. You can't transition and then go back. It needs to be one direction, and maybe in the example that just needs to be clear. I think it's probably, for many it might be inferred, but I think it would be helpful if we make that explicit, is that it's one way, but otherwise supportive. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Just to check back to staff, I think that is already clear, isn't it? That once you've had the 3 years, that's it.
I think what Karen's saying is you can't go back the other way. You can't de-recognize. So I can clear that up in the example.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Karen. Andrew.
Thanks. So also being one of the members in June that wasn't entirely comfortable with this, I think I have a different perspective from an empathy perspective, in that I look at the 3-year transition period. I look at potentially what this will do, and I'm going to be bold and call it false hope that it actually gives people. I think people look at it and they think it's going to take me 3 years. I was in Zimbabwe last week and they fell exactly into that trap and are now in the qualification period. But I guess that's a different debate. If I go to the integrity of the standards, I do have some concerns with the current drafting in the paper and the current drafting that's in the standard itself as well. I think the previous version of IPSAS 33 was very clear that it was on a class by class or category by category basis. Now, there may be, and what we're hearing through the comment letters, other interpretations of that. I think as a board, we need to decide, is that an acceptable interpretation of the previous wording, yes or no? In my view, it would not have been an acceptable interpretation of it. Now, if as a board we decide we do want to still allow that treatment on a piecemeal by piecemeal basis, I think then the drafting and the standard needs to change. It's not a correct interpretation, but we would like to allow that going forward, and the text needs to reflect that. The concern that I have with the current drafting, if we say this is an acceptable interpretation of class by class or category by category, those verbiage runs throughout our suite of standards. So when you start getting into 45 or the other standards and it speaks about class by class, is it now also acceptable to interpret that on an item by item basis as we're proposing here? So I guess I'm still in the camp of I'm not supportive of the proposals on allowing the piecemeal. But that aside, if we accept that as a decision, I think the current drafting needs to acknowledge that this is a change to the standard that was there to address stakeholders' concerns, not to address the interpretation of the standard, but to address concerns that was raised. Thanks.
Dave Beckham.
Not arguing, I'll just clarify why staff didn't propose any changes to the wording. We were trying to retain the wording from IPSAS 33. So to Andrew's point, if the board wants to change the wording to be more clear, it wasn't the staff was trying to avoid being more clear. We were trying to be consistent with the wording in IPSAS 33.
Thanks, Dave. Yakuba.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree what Andrew said when it's come to category by item accounting. But meantime, I think we are principle based. So it means that if we do not have sufficient information on a class, maybe we have information on a part of the class. So to me, in that sense, we can account for some item of the class as well. So maybe we need to not stick on the wording, but to go through principle-based issues and then look at in what way we can apply and then recognize the item that we can identify and measure.
So I think I'm slightly confused, frankly, about where we've got to on this, because I thought the clarification was that we were basically taking it back to what is in IPSAS 33, the current version. And all that we're doing is moving that over into the new version. So I'm not sure why we're having this argument then, because it seems to me that we're just adding a couple of examples that show what you can do. So I think there's a sense that actually we, as a board, are in favour, the majority of the board are in favour of the approach that staff has proposed in the paper. And I'm not sure whether there's further iterations on bits of wording or something that are required. I'm just struggling to understand what the argument is, to be honest. And maybe I'm not. There's something I'm missing on this. Dave.
Andrew, I'm going to try and say your point differently, so jump in if I say it incorrectly. I think Andrew's saying there are interpretations under current IPSAS 33, and if we change the words, we can be clear what the options are rather than having multiple interpretations.
So if I'm looking at AG 19, that's the paragraph that was in old 33. It only speaks about a class by class or a category by category. Now, my interpretation of a class is the entire class, not individual items within a class. And that's how we've interpreted across our entire suite of literature. What we're proposing now is to allow recognition of individual items within that class. So no longer to transition the entire class from your previous policy of expensing to say capitalizing now, which was the previous wording. Now, if we're accepting that, then we should not be saying you do it on a class by class or category by category basis, but on an individual item basis is also an acceptable option. But that then is a change to the previous wording under 33.
Karen, help us out on this, because I think we're nearly there, and I think we just need to nail this. Karen.
I'm not sure. Hopefully I can help. I mean, I want to be really supportive of this because I recognise this is the way it's done. What I think Andrew's concern is, and I'm not going to try and put words in your mouth, but was my concern as well, was about, if you like, cross-contamination of this approach into other standards, because I think we recognise, I recognise on first-time adoption, it's not necessarily easy and it can take time, but I would not want to see the item by item in other standards. So I wouldn't want there to be any leakage, and we're not setting a precedent that is what happens in other standards. So that was my concern way back, and it's probably still my concern. And I think the challenge is that this new paragraph is in the authoritative guidance, not in the implementation guidance. And if it was in implementation guidance, that might make it slightly easier. But that's just a thought.
I want 2 minutes with staff on this before we decide how to proceed. So, Dave, if we can just. Okay, helpful timeout. So I think where we get to is we have general agreement amongst the board in terms of the approach that staff has proposed, where there are a couple of clarifications in terms of wording that Andrew is suggesting, which don't change that, but just actually help in terms of the clarity of the wording. So what we are proposing is that we actually move to approval of the standards subject to agreement of those final pieces of wording, and those pieces of wording to be brought back on Friday. Is that okay by the board in terms of the way forward? Because they're relatively limited pieces of wording, but it's important that we take the time to get them right. And I think, it would be a shame not to move ahead and approve. So if everybody's okay on that basis, we will just bring back those suggested pieces of wording on Friday. Now we vote subject to you seeing those pieces of wording. Okay, so Dave, if you can move us then into the formal approval process.
So there's a few steps we have to go through. So the first step is staff present the revised content of the exposed standard. That's in 4.3.1. The second is the program and technical director advises whether due process has been followed effectively.
Due process has been effectively followed.
The IPSASB confirms whether it is satisfied that due process has been followed effectively. Ian, we usually go to you on this.
Does anybody disagree with the assertion that due process has been followed effectively? Okay, I think we're content on that.
And then next we move to a vote on approval of IPSAS 33. And Ross, you usually lead this.
So for those of you who vote for, please raise your hand. And if you're online, please raise your hand or flag. This is voting for.
And this is obviously subject.
Sorry, I've confused everybody. Put your flag up if you're in the room, please. Andrew, you better put your flag up. Yeah, 16. And we've got one absent. And so now if everyone could put their flags down and your hands down, I'm going to ask for anybody who wants to vote against. We have one vote against, Andrew. And we're at full numbers, so no abstentions. Thanks.
Okay, so that's approved then. So take us through the remaining steps.
So the next step, sorry, can you pull this? Thank you. The next step is the IPSASB considers whether a vote on re-exposure is necessary. Staff in the paper don't think re-exposure is necessary. There's been no significant changes, and the change we just discussed today is a clarification in response to comments from respondents.
So anybody consider that re-exposure is necessary? Andrew? Do you want to just explain why?
Sure. So the change we've just spoken about for me is a change in the principles of the standard. I wouldn't have considered to be an acceptable interpretation. So it is a change in the principle. Other respondents haven't had a chance to look at it. I would feel it's necessary, therefore, to re-expose.
Okay, so I think we need to vote on that then.
So just explain for members, we don't do many votes on re-exposure, but for us to re-expose, the board has to agree that one wants to have a re-exposure vote. And then like any approval, we need 2/3 of members. That's 2/3 of our 18 members to vote for re-exposure. So as Andrew's asked for the re-exposure vote, I'll now go through voting again, asking on re-exposure. So first, if you'd like to vote for re-exposure, please raise your flag. If you're in the room, if you're online, please raise your flag. So it looks like we have one vote for re-exposure. And just for the record, I'll ask for those voting against re-exposure to please put your flag up. Including those online, please indicate your vote. So we have 16 against, one absent, and no abstentions.
Okay, so we won't re-expose then.
And then the point to discuss, setting an effective date. And we proposed an effective date of January 1st, 2028, which is consistent with our normal 18-month after approval.
With an earlier adoption allowed. Anybody disagree with that? Scott, are you still?
And then the last step is that the IPSASB issues basis for conclusions, and those were attached to the standard in 4.3.1.
Any comments, any final comments on that? Karen?
I think it's really important that we cover the point that Andrew has raised in the basis for conclusions. So I think that they should be updated to reflect that point.
Okay, so in terms of the way forward then on Friday, we will see the adjustments to wording, and then we'll have another look at that specific paragraph in basis for conclusions and see if that needs needs adjustment. Ross?
Just to highlight as well, because we don't have it very often, but because Andrew's voted against, he's allowed to have a summary of his dissenting view in the minutes, and we can also reflect in the BCs if he feels so.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, Ross. So with that, I think that brings us to the conclusion of the IPSAS 33 update approval. And that also brings us to the end of today's business in terms of the meeting. So in terms of the reconvening the meeting, we will start again at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, when we will be considering materiality, phase one. Ross, to you in terms of admin.
So just another reminder about the visit to the OCC for those who are joining. The bus will be out front at 5:30. Please be down a few minutes before 5:30 so we're ready to go. I didn't hear any dress code, but I'm assuming it's similar to what we're wearing today. So, I think I might lose my tie, but other than that, yes. Joao confirms if you don't want to wear a tie, you don't have to wear a tie.
Okay. So that's business casual. I mean, I think if we say business casual, because that reflects the fact we're visiting OCC's offices. So I think collectively we should be, reasonably smart. So I think business casual. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So thanks very much, everyone. I think that's been a useful afternoon's work. It's quite challenging, I think, actually making sure that we move towards finalising the work plan consultation, but at the same time make sure we've incorporated the comments from the Standards Assessors Forum. But I think we've achieved that successfully. So thanks very much. It was a good discussion. So. See you later, and then those that are coming this evening to OCC, and to everybody else, have a good evening. If you're leaving forum attendance, thank you very much for attending. Safe travels, and look forward to reconvening tomorrow morning. Thanks very much.